Hi, everybody. It's great to be here. Well, I haven't met any of you before, so I guess I'll just tell you a little bit about myself. Um, when I was a child, I was always sick. In and out of the doctor, lots of antibiotics, never well, considered to be a frail child. When I was 9 years of age, my lovely Uncle Ted in Australia sent my mother a book called Nutritional Science. And this was back in the days when anyone that ate brown bread was considered really weird. The 70s. And so my mother changed the whole family's diet. And I hated it. Out went the sugary puddings, and there was much less dairy and all this sort of stuff, less meat, more vegetables. And I hated it, rebelled, gave out for about 6 months. Then I gave out. I stopped bothering to give out, and took it on board. Well, my health changed. Less visits to the doctor, less antibiotics, and ever since then, I've always had a huge interest in how you can use the power of food to change your health. So then I was working in the antiques trade, but I had a change of career, went back to college and studied nutritional therapy for 3 years. University of Bedfordshire and the Institute of Optimum Nutrition. So that's me in a nutshell. I'm delighted to be here, and I hope I can give you a few things that will get you thinking. So I'm going to talk for about 40 minutes, and hopefully we'll have a little bit of time for Q&A at the end, if anyone wants to ask anything. Today is just a taster. I'd love to go into detail on even one digestive issue, but you'd be here all day, so you'd be glazing over. I work with patients generally that have had all the medical investigations and they really can't find a cause for their problems. And I'm constantly amazed at often how making a few really simple and easy changes can have the power to really enhance your health and make you feel a lot better. It's very important if you have symptoms or unexplained pain of any sort that you go and see a doctor and find out what is actually happening. I don't diagnose or treat medical problems. I just help people I help people unblock the things that are blocking their body from healing them. So I believe that if you get your digestive system right, that you have about 95% of what you need in order to be healthy. Digestion affects everything. So I've lots of free information on my website, annacollins.ie, information about particular digestive issues. And I also have on the website a blog which has recipes on it. So they're all sort of supportive of health, basically. So there's nothing chefy that's beyond the home cook on there. They're all photographed. They're all kind of reasonably simple recipes. So I want to just do a little straw poll here. Can I ask everybody to put their hand up? And what I want to do is I want to see who here has perfect digestive health. So if everybody could raise their hand. Could you all raise your hand? That'd be absolutely great. So anybody that is thinking yes to any of these questions I'm going to ask, if the answer is yes to any of these questions, you put your hand down, okay? So does anyone here feel off after eating fatty food? Or does anyone have gallstones or had gallbladder surgery or discomfort under the right-hand side of their ribs if they eat fatty foods? So anyone that answers yes to those, put down your hand. Is there anyone here that gets any bloating or digestive discomfort after eating at any point? Is there anyone here that ever gets heartburn, acid reflux, or has to take acid lowering drugs? If the answer is yes, put your hand down. Is there anyone here that has gastritis, ulcers, IBS, or any medically diagnosed digestive issue? So put your hand down if the answer is yes. Is there anyone here who has food sensitivities of any sort or celiac disease? So if you eat particular food, you feel off, or celiac disease. Is there anyone here that doesn't have an easy to pass solid bowel movement at least once a day? If the answer is yes, Put your hand down. Is there anyone here that gets diarrhea from time to time? If yes, put your hand down. Is there anyone that takes steroids or non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs like paracetamol, aspirin, anything like that, or Ponstan? If you take any of those medications, put your hand down. Is there anyone here with autoimmune conditions like hypothyroidism, arthritis, psoriasis, MS, anything like that? Put your hand down. Is there anyone with a metabolic condition like type 2 diabetes, eczema, Parkinson's, anything like that? Put your hand down. Okay, so I'm seeing just 2 hands, 3 hands still up. So there are 3 people that their digestive system may be in quite good shape, and everyone else has potentially some sort of issue going on. So I think that's probably most of the room. So what is digestion? Well, it's a long and very complex process. And where does it start? It starts in your mouth. So chewing is really, really important. It grinds up the food, makes it small, so that the digestive juices, both in your mouth and in your stomach, can get at it. I mean, that's a fairly obvious thing. You'd be surprised at the number of people that tell me they don't chew. That starts off a lot of digestive problems. So in the mouth, your tongue mixes the food with the enzymes that are in your saliva, and that starts to break down carbohydrates or foods that naturally contain sugars. So that's things like potatoes and starch and syrups and honeys and fruit. Root vegetables, grains, that the digestion's actually started in the mouth. And you need water to make saliva and to make digestive juices in your stomach. So hydrochloric acid, it's a very strong acid that's made in your stomach. So you chew really well, the food is starting to be broken down, and then it is going down into the stomach. So this is just a schematic diagram. You know, your stomach's approximately here, and it's about the size of, if you put your 2 hands together like that, that is about the size of your stomach. So you can see how if people eat massive meals, that might put a bit of a strain on the old digestive system. So your stomach lining should actually be able to produce lots of hydrochloric acid, and that is a really, really strong acid. It's about the same strength as lemon juice, pH of 2, so it's quite a strong acid. And this acid is really important. And in a healthy stomach, you will have a very strong stomach lining. It's called a mucosal lining, and that protects you from being burnt by the acid that your stomach is supposed to make in order to digest the food. So the acid, well, why do you need it? You need it to digest proteins. So that's things like beans and pulses, nuts, seeds, eggs, meat, fish, dairy. Those are the protein-rich foods. And you need lots of zinc and vitamin B6 in order to make the acid in the stomach. So it's a problem I often see that people are very zinc deficient. If you're not digesting very well, you won't be able to digest zinc, and the zinc is needed to make the acid in the stomach. So it kind of ends up being a bit of a cycle for most people. So you need the acid to digest the proteins, and you need zinc, vitamin B6, enough fluids as well, water, to make hydrochloric acid. And what I find very often in patients that come to me that are vegan is that they can be very, very low in acid in the stomach, and that means they have problems digesting proteins. And they get low in acid in the stomach because a vegan diet doesn't really contain very much zinc. It contains a lot of copper-rich foods, and copper and zinc act in sort of opposition to each other. And so often vegan people have to be really careful to keep their zinc levels up, often using supplementation, because it's just not adequate in the diet. As you get older, your ability to make acid in the stomach will generally tend to decline. There is a condition called hypochlorhydria, and it just means inadequate stomach acid. 50% of people age 50 have inadequate stomach acid. 60% age 60. It's all very symmetrical. 70% of people age 70 have inadequate stomach acid. And that affects everything that's going on in the rest of your digestive system further down. So acid blocking medications switch off your ability to make stomach acid. Poor diet. I'm sure you all have excellent diets here. But poor digestion means that you can't digest the nutrients you need in order to make the acid in the stomach, even if your diet is excellent. So the results, well, it can immediately cause things like reflux, bloating, cramping, constipation, diarrhea, imbalance in the bacteria in your gut, and even bowel disorders, including inflammatory bowel conditions. I see a lot of patients with inflammatory bowel conditions, often really very serious, and they're under medical supervision, and many of them can end up getting off medication because we've addressed the root cause of their digestive issue. There was a study in 2013 published in the Journal of Gastroenterology, and basically in plain English, low stomach acid is associated with an exacerbation of dyspeptic symptoms in patients. So that means when you have low stomach acid, you have more heartburn and reflux and digestive discomfort, you know, this sort of sensation people get here of pressure after eating a meal. So the lower the ability to make acid in the stomach, the worse the symptoms. And there have been a few studies showing this. There was another study done of postmenopausal women, and they found that the lower the acid in the stomach, the worse the symptoms of heartburn and acid reflux were. So it really is very well documented in the studies, but your GP won't have heard of this. They go, well, if you have reflux, you obviously have too much acid, so here's this acid-blocking medication. And it's just not really correct. So most people, about 99% of people, when you actually help them increase stomach acidity, the symptoms go away and they go, oh my God, I haven't had heartburn for 2 weeks. But you do need to take a medical history, and, you know, if there's any ulceration, then you need to deal with that first. So it's not about just building up acid willy-nilly without care to what's actually going on in the patient. So if your stomach acid is inadequate, you can't break down the proteins, and the next phase of digestion is impaired. Does anyone know how long it takes a good meal that contains some protein to be churned around in the stomach and start to empty out of the stomach into the intestine? It actually takes about 1.5 to 2 hours for the food to leave the stomach. So remember, the stomach is just, you know, this thing here. After the stomach, you've got the small intestine, and that's about 20 feet long. And then you've got the large bowel, which is about 12 foot long if it was extended and stretched out. So it takes... The stomach acts like a sort of a washing machine. It actually has lots of muscles, and it actually does this grinding action. And the purpose of that is to mix the acid with the food and get all the food exposed to the acid so it can be broken down. The acid breaks down proteins into things called peptides. They're basically just smaller fragments of protein. And then you have a thing at the bottom of the stomach called the gastric sphincter. It's basically a valve. And the valve, after 1.5 to 2 hours after eating a good meal, so a meal that contains protein like beans or pulses or meat or fish or something like that, the gastric sphincter, the valve, it rhythmically opens every few minutes, and it lets out some of the stomach contents into the small intestine, which is the next phase of the digestive system. And so these stomach contents, which should be really acidic, they actually start squirting down into the small intestine. So you're ready for the next phase of the digestion. And the mixture coming from the stomach has to be highly acidic, because the acidity of it actually is sensed by nerves in your intestine, which then send a message up to your brain to tell another nerve to let the food continue going down and to start pumping out the next phase of digestive juices. So the acid of the stomach contents, it triggers your gallbladder, which is like a little bag. It's like a little pumping sack. The acidity of this mix from the stomach triggers that, and the gallbladder starts to pump. Now, if you have gallstones, you have a bit of a blocked gallbladder. Or if you've had a very low fibre diet, your gallbladder is probably sluggish and it needs a bit of pepping up. But if your gallbladder is working well, it starts to pump out its contents. And what does it contain? It contains fat-splitting liquids from your liver called bile salts. It contains toxins from your liver. So the gallbladder is the way the toxins get out of your liver and leave your body eventually. And the gallbladder also contains things called pancreatic enzymes. So those are basically things that help the breakdown of fats, proteins, carbohydrates. So it's the gallbladder, it's a little bag, it collects up enzymes from the pancreas, waste from the liver, and bile salts from the liver. And the job of the bile salts is to break down fats into tiny, tiny droplets so that the enzymes can then get nibbling away and breaking them down. So the gallbladder is really crucial. But if the stomach acid isn't sufficient, the trigger for the gallbladder is lessened. And so then you can get build-up and accumulation of things like gallstones. And then you also get backing up of toxins in the liver. So, anyone with fatigue issues, there is often an issue with backing up of toxins in the liver. So we need to check that everything's working really, really well. So the gallbladder pumps out all this stuff and it mixes with the food and it actually neutralizes the acid coming from the stomach. So the stomach makes acid, but the gallbladder collects up alkaline fluids and they basically balance the acid. So can you see if either the gallbladder isn't working or the stomach isn't working very well, you're going to have the wrong acid-alkaline balance. Well, you're not going to have balance at all. And so that causes problems further down. If you're dehydrated or if you're unable to neutralize the stomach contents in the small intestine, then, or if you're unable to neutralize the acid in the stomach, the stomach can often then not release its contents into the intestine. And so pressure can build up. And that can be a cause of things like burping and gas and belching after meals. Is actually the food hangs around too long in the stomach. So there are lots of little things that can cause difficulties digesting our food. So what else do I want to tell you? Yeah, feeling off after fatty foods or having a pain under your right side of your ribs after you've eaten a fatty meal. Those would be classic signs that the gallbladder is a bit sluggish. Or sometimes people can get a pain in the back after they've eaten a fatty meal, that they mightn't feel it under the ribs, but they could feel it on the right side of the back. So what's the next phase of digestion? Well, it's what's happening in the small intestine, which is about 20 feet long. So what does the small intestine do? Well, it's not just a tube. We tend to think of the digestive system as just tubes and the food goes down it, but it's actually much cleverer than that. So in the lining of your small intestine, you have cells called enterocytes, and their job is to actually make more enzymes. So you remember that there are enzymes made in your pancreas and they collect in your gallbladder, and those are pumped out and mixed with the food. But also in the small intestine, if it's a healthy small intestine, that will also be able to make enzymes, which are very important for completing the digestive process. And if your intestine is damaged because of maybe a trauma or because of taking antibiotics or because of taking medications like Ponstan or non-steroidal anti-inflammatories, ibuprofen, paracetamol, if your intestine is damaged, then your ability to make enzymes on the walls of this intestine, those are going to be reduced. The ability is going to be reduced. So if the intestine is damaged, your ability to make the enzymes goes down and your ability to digest goes down. So digestion, it's not just in the stomach, it's further down as well. So what does your small intestine need in order to be really well and really healthy? Well, it needs good bacteria, and a healthy gut is going to have many, many species, many hundreds, different hundreds of types of bacteria in it. A lot of the bacteria in our body live in the large bowel, which is a bit further down, but a healthy bowel is going to have over 100 different species. And I learned an interesting factoid last weekend, which was that we as humans have about 20,000 genes. So a gene is basically a unit of information, tells our body to make proteins, and so that controls all our function. So we have about 20,000 genes, but we individually contain about 200,000 genes that are not human. They're made by the microorganisms, the critters that live in us. So that's bacteria, funguses, and viruses. And so we need a really good complement of bacteria living in us. So we need a fibre-rich diet, which obviously if people are eating lots of raw food and lots of diversity and lots of natural plant foods, they're going to have reasonable diversity of bacteria in the gut. So things that damage the ability of the good bacteria to be numerous and to be lots of different types, to be diverse. Stress, steroids, non-steroidal anti-inflammatories, or inadequate nutrients, or inability to digest nutrients. So, many of us might have a fantastic diet, and, I often used to get patients coming to me and I look at the food diary and go, oh my God, this looks perfect, and yet this person is so unwell. It's not just about what you eat, but it's about what you can digest and process and absorb as well. So antibiotics, even one dose of an oral antibiotic will clear out over 99% of your beneficial microorganisms in your gut. But did you know that many of us are exposed to antibiotics without actually taking antibiotic pills? So if you use plastic chopping boards or commercial chopping boards, or if you use mainstream branded toothpastes or hand washes, you're exposing yourself to quite a lot of antibiotics coming into your body. If you eat non-organic food, non-organic vegetables, fruit, wheat, you're getting residues of glyphosate, which is also known as Roundup. It's a herbicide. And that herbicide was originally developed as an antibiotic, but it was so toxic that they actually had to use it for something else. And how this herbicide works, how Roundup works, is that it kills all the microorganisms in the soil. And then that has an impact on certain weeds, which then die because they can't get nutrients if the bacteria are not in the soil. So non-organic produce, certain produce is more contaminated than others, but that has an antibiotic effect on the beneficial bacteria in our gut. So it's not just about, I don't take antibiotics from the doctor, therefore I'm fine. So it's just something that we need to be aware of, just making these really simple swaps, using soap rather than antibacterial hand wash, using normal washing up liquid instead of a washing up liquid with added antibiotics in it. So, they're not things that would immediately come to mind. So the good bacteria, why are they important? Well, they nourish the cells of the small intestine. The good bacteria take fibre and they actually use it for food. And out of the fibre, they make fats. Isn't that amazing? So the good bacteria make things called short-chain fatty acids. They have names like butyrate and valerate and propionate. And those things directly nourish the linings of the gut. So the good bacteria are absolutely critical for our health. And it's amazing how people can regrow populations of good bacteria if they're on a post-antibiotic program, or if they've been on a program where their bacteria have been wiped out by certain medical treatments that they've had to undergo. It's amazing what they can actually get back. So if any one bit of your digestion isn't working properly, then really you're missing out, even if you have the best, most fabulous diet in the world. Before I studied nutrition, I used to think health was just about diet and exercise, but I now realise that actually there's more than just diet and exercise, and I'll touch on that a little bit later. So I'm just going to touch really briefly on a few individual sort of health issues that people might have, or the most common issues that they might have with their digestive system. And gastric ulcers are one, and gastritis. So there's an enzyme And remember, enzymes help the digestion happen. There's an enzyme called pepsin, and it's made in your stomach, and it digests the protective mucus in your stomach and the first part of the intestine if you have an ulcer. So what you want is a nice strong stomach lining. The mucus is protecting you from your very strong acid that your stomach is making. So in ulcers and gastritis, what happens is that the mucus lining becomes thin. It's basically under attack. And it might be under attack because of medications, or it might be under attack because you have an overgrowth of H. pylori bacteria. And there's new evidence to suggest that this bacteria, which is associated with stomach ulcers, it may even be helpful in small amounts, but it's when it becomes problematic or pathogenic or disease-causing that then what it does is it actually wears away the lining of the stomach, and then your acid attacks you, and then you get pain and symptoms and ulcerations. So one of the things that causes this lining to become really frail is chronic stress. Severe stress, and there are a lot of animal studies where they subject animals to severe stress, and then they try and use medication or whatever it might be to see does that fix the problem of the frail stomach lining as a result of stress. The mucus lining, the protective lining that protects you from your acid, it needs lots of antioxidants from your diet. So that would be things like vitamin A, vitamin C, vitamin E, and things called polyphenols, which are basically naturally occurring plant chemicals which have an antioxidant effect in our body. So the mucus lining needs those in order to remain healthy, and it needs lots of water. So if people are dehydrated and they're maybe drinking a lot of caffeinated drinks, or they're drinking maybe a lot of fruit juices, that has a dehydrating effect. And they can get thinning of this protective lining. Causes of ulcers, well, low fibre diets can be a factor, and I'm sure none of you have low fibre diets. Do you all eat lots of plants? Yeah. So I'm sure you're a very knowledgeable audience in terms of the benefits of fruit and veg and that sort of thing. So yeah, low fibre diets are a big factor in ulcers. There was a recent study showing that people who had a good vitamin A intake, vitamin A is found in eggs and liver particularly, they reduced the risk of stomach ulcers by 54%. So, we will all say, yes, there is what you call pro-vitamin A in vegetarian foods. So things like carrots contain beta-carotene, and that can be made into vitamin A in our body by some of us. So if you have a genetic anomaly, and we all have about 1,000 genetic differences, then you won't be able to necessarily make vitamin A out of beta-carotene. So you might need actual preformed vitamin A. So you can't necessarily get it from just eating plants. So people who ate a high fibre diet reduced their risk of ulcers by 45%. And some of the best fibre was from things like flax, vegetables, pulses, so beans and pulses, and oats. Eating 7 or more servings of fruit and vegetable a day, and a serving is about a cup. So eating 7 or more servings of fruit and vegetables a day lowers ulcer risk 33% compared with people who ate 3 or less servings a day of vegetables and fruit. And here's an interesting one. There was an African physician called Borok who studied more than 1,000 patients with ulcers, and he concluded that eliminating refined sugar, white flour, corn products, chocolate, fried foods and coffee reduced gastric irritation. So wheat is a gut irritant. Many people do better off it. It's not just about the gluten in wheat, but it can be about other more subtle things like glyphosate herbicide residues in wheat, and also wheat germ agglutinin, which is a problematic protein. So many people do better off it. And really, from the science I've seen in the last few years, we all do better on a low gluten diet. Some of us need a totally gluten-free diet, but everyone will do better on a low gluten diet, because in everybody, scientific studies show that gluten damages your gut for at least 3 hours after you eat it. You do that for 30, 40, 50, 60, 70 years, eventually your gut fails to heal after it's been damaged, because it's just incessant. So the old advice for gastric ulcers and gastritis was eat a bland diet, no spices. Spices and herbs are actually anti-inflammatory, and chilies are used in Ayurvedic medicine to cure stomach ulcers because they thicken the protective mucosal lining in the stomach. And you think, oh my God, I have an ulcer, the last thing I should be eating is chilies, but it actually builds up the lining. And chilies contain a pain-relieving substance. It basically stimulates your nerve endings and dulls the sensation of pain. So herbs and spices are actually fantastic if people have stomach ulcers. Some of my patients say to me, oh, I can't eat Indian food. Every time I go for an Indian takeaway, oh, it's dreadful. I have a terrible problem. My stomach is in bits. It's not the spices, it's the toxic oils. They're having low-grade vegetable oils in the curries. So when they start learning how to make curries using more natural ingredients, then lo and behold, the curries don't set them off. So it's just low-quality curries that are a problem. The old advice on stomach ulcers and gastritis: drink milk. But milk actually raises the acid in the stomach within 20 minutes. So the best advice is drink a pint of water if you have an attack of any sort of acid pain or an ulcer attack. So chili heals by increasing the stomach lining blood flow, and so that helps heal and prevent ulcers. Who knew? And I'll tell you something else about chewing, which I mentioned earlier. It stimulates a substance called epidermal growth factor. What the hell's that? It is actually a growth factor that helps our stomach lining regenerate itself. So when people just inhale their food and they don't chew, they're actually damaging the stomach. So yeah, that's gastritis and ulcers. So how to heal your digestion with food? Well, the number one food I'm going to suggest, it's not a food, it's actually water. So you need several litres of fluids just to make digestive juices. Does anyone know how many litres of digestive juices a healthy person makes every day? 9. Isn't that mad? 9 litres. So you don't need to drink 9 litres of water because your body recycles a lot of fluids. But we actually, a healthy person, they will produce 9 litres of digestive fluids. So that's saliva, that's stomach acid, that's gallbladder juices, it's enzymes from the pancreas, and fluids coming from the liver. Coffee and tea make you pee more. They increase urinary output, so they're not the best hydrating fluids. So things like herbal teas and water are really much, much better, or things like broths and soups as well, or vegetable juices. A suggestion to help heal your digestion with food is having green vegetables at lunch and dinner. So really at least a serving of greens at lunch and dinner. The folic acid in the greens helps to build the strength and integrity of your gut. And the magnesium helps your bowel function, and it helps reduce stress. So that means mental stress and things like anxiety. We also need to be eating a thing called soluble fibre several times a day. So it's basically types of fibre that feed good bugs, the good critters in your gut that help heal and repair and actually help the lining regenerate so that it can make digestive enzymes. So things like ground flax, berries, pears, apples, oats, those are really rich in this special sort of soluble fibre. Onions, leeks, beans, they're also fantastic. And we just need a really wide range of all sorts of plant fibres because different critters like to eat different fibres. So you might have what you consider a really healthy diet, but you only eat 10 foods. Well, if you're only eating 10 foods or even only eating 20 foods, you've got a deficit in some of the families of good bacteria that help keep you really, really well. So for repairing and maintaining your gut, and your whole digestive system on a day-to-day basis, you need lots of antioxidants. And so if half your lunch and half your evening meal is green salad or green vegetables or salad vegetables, so vegetables that are low in carbohydrates, so things like anything green, onions, tomatoes, aubergines, cruciferous vegetables. If any of your, you just need lots of these in your diet. So lots of antioxidants and, maybe a couple of servings of fresh fruit. It's a good idea not to eat too much fruit because too much fruit means too much sugars. And when we have too much sugars in our diet, even if it's from healthy foods, then that is problematic. So if we are living on root vegetables and fruit and grains, even whole grains, then that's problematic because we've got sugar overload and that feeds the not so helpful bacteria. So we also need vitamin C. It builds collagen for strong intestine and for healing and day-to-day just repair, housekeeping in your in your stomach, your small intestine, your large intestine. You need zinc and selenium, which really are at high levels in meat and fish. You will get some selenium from Brazil nuts, depending on where they were grown and how they were grown. But really zinc, it's very hard to get enough in a vegan diet. You really need to be supplementing. Proton pump inhibitor medications, so things like esomeprazole, pantoprazole, Nexium, they basically switch off your ability to digest minerals. So if you're on those medications, you will not be digesting protein properly and you will not be able to digest minerals. So you will end up eventually with severe shortage of minerals. So you need good quality mineral supplementation if you're on these sort of drugs. You also need vitamin E to heal and keep your gut in really, really good condition. So foods that have lots of vitamin E, things like extra virgin olive oil, if it's raw, avocados, raw nuts and seeds, really, really high in vitamin E. And the advantage of eating foods that are rich in vitamin E is over supplements, is that if you eat a food, you're getting many vitamin E components. So there are actually, vitamin E is a complex. There are lots of different substances. So there are tocotrienols, and tocopherols. So there's a whole range of vitamin E complex. So eating the food really is king. So if we don't have enough vitamin E in our diet because maybe we have a very low fat or low oil diet, we will end up vitamin C deficient. And that is because vitamin E comes in and helps vitamin C to be recycled and restored in our body. So if we just have vitamin C foods, but we don't eat fatty foods like nuts and seeds or extra virgin olive oil, we're going to actually get a functional deficiency of vitamin C because the vitamin C just won't last in our body. So another antioxidant that we need is zinc, which I mentioned before. And low zinc causes a thinning of the protective mucus layer in your stomach. And you'll be at increased risk of all digestive disorders. And something I do with people that have gut problems that need healing is at some point in a program I will always give them a month or two really, really high dose zinc to really accelerate that stomach healing. There are lots of fantastic clinical trials on using high dose zinc to help heal stomach problems. There's a study of stomach ulcer patients with no evidence of zinc deficiency. It was in the Medical Journal of Australia, and they gave a really, really high dose of zinc. It was zinc sulfate, and they gave 220 milligrams 3 times a day for 3 weeks. Now, a normal dose that I might give just in a really good quality multivitamin would be 15 milligrams a day. And then if we were doing high dose, I'd give another 20, and we do that for a few months. This was 220 milligrams, so it's a really massive dose, and they were giving 3 times a day. But they got hugely accelerated healing of stomach ulcers. And of those who failed to heal, all were in the placebo group. So very gratifying kind of statistic from that study. So what are the most potent antioxidants for digestive wellness. And I might have given you a clue earlier on when I was talking about ulcers and chilies. Does anyone know what some of the most potent foods are? Herbs and spices. Yeah, so herbs and spices have a potency that's thousands of times more potent than vitamins and minerals. We still need vitamins and minerals, but what herbs and spices do is they contain very high levels of polyphenols, naturally occurring plant chemicals. And those polyphenols are actually not digested by us, but they stimulate our body to make more of it, our own antioxidants that we make in the body itself. So things like glutathione that we make for ourselves. So I'll talk about turmeric. One of the main ingredients in turmeric is a thing called curcumin. And there was a randomized, double-blind, placebo-controlled study of patients with heartburn or flatulence. And they were given turmeric extract 4 times a day for 7 days. And 83% of the flatulence sufferers and 87% of those with heartburn achieved significant improvement. And that was just in 7 days using one spice. So I had somebody that came to a series of lectures I gave, and this lady got rid of her embarrassing digestive noises in 3 weeks by changing the proportions of carbohydrates, so that's starchy and sweet foods, to protein foods and fibre foods that she was eating. And she went on my herbs and spices eating program, where she just incorporated different herbs and spices into most of her meals. So I'm a bit like a turkey voting for Christmas. This lady said, I was going to make an appointment to come and see you, but now it's totally fixed, so I'm not going to come and see you. But thanks very much. So I was kind of delighted, really, because she got such radical improvements so quickly. So some medications can interact with healthy foods like vegetables and spices. So if you're on any medication, it's a good idea to get professional advice if you're thinking about doing big change in your diet. I'll touch on another issue that is really distressing and serious medical condition that people can have that often might come to see me. There was a randomized double-blind placebo-controlled study of patients with ulcerative colitis. So I don't know whether you know what that is, but it's basically a serious condition of the large bowel, and usually the symptoms will be chronic diarrhea, bleeding and mucus, and patients are often almost housebound, and they can often end up being hospitalized because it's a really serious medical condition. Anyway, there was a 2006 study, and patients were in remission, so they were stable, and they were on medication, and they either took curcumin, which is the turmeric extract, or they took a placebo. And there were much fewer relapses in the curcumin group, so they stayed symptom-free. Many more of them stayed symptom-free. And they're really thousands, if not tens of thousands, of really high quality studies published in peer-reviewed scientific journals now. So, people that say, oh, all this stuff about food and treating things naturally and getting yourself better naturally, oh, it's all just, hearsay and old wives. It's not, it's science. So the science really has caught up with what probably naturopaths were saying 50 years ago, and people either believed it or they didn't. But now really the science is in on a lot of these things, and it's a very white hot area of research. And these would be studies in animals and humans, so not just in test tubes in the lab, because studies in test tubes in the lab don't always translate to being of use in humans. So what if you took this knowledge to design yourself a new way of eating? The possibilities really are endless, and I really believe that your body knows what to do. It's just if it's not quite doing it correctly, there are blocks, and they need to be unpicked for your body to get you back to being really in the whole of your health. So I want to just touch on a few specific therapeutic foods now, and one of my favourite ones that I often get patients making who are willing is bone broths, which our grannies used to make. I know my mother used to make as well, and that's made by boiling bones of animals or fish for several hours or more. So there are a lot of amazing nutrients in bone broths, and so some of the key nutrients would be things like collagen, hyaluronic acid, gelatin, proline, glycine, phosphorus, magnesium, and potassium as well. But hyaluronic acid is one of the things that helps keep our skin young looking and plump looking. And all of us, I'm over 50 now, so I'm very concerned to stay as young looking as possible for as long as possible. And so some of those things are in bone broths. I would advise if people make bone broths that really you only use organic bones, because non-organic bones will often be really high in arsenic and other toxins, and even antibiotic residues from the poor animals that have been not treated very well. So proline and collagen help heal micro wounds in your intestines, and they lower inflammation around the body, especially in your gut. And gelatin attracts and holds liquids, including digestive juices, so it actually helps your absorption and your digestion. And collagen also supports your building of bones. Collagen is the network onto which all the minerals attach in order to build really strong bone. And I mean, I'm very keen on all this area, having been diagnosed with celiac related osteoporosis 4 years ago. Just got back my results of my second ever DEXA scan, and all the markers have improved, and without any medication. So these things do work. They're very, very important. It's not just about bone broth with osteoporosis. You need to be on a full program. So really, it's better if these things are homemade. They certainly need to be organic, and commercial products can have nasty additives in them. And basically, it helps rebuild the damaged tissues in your gut. It reduces inflammation and irritation. There's a patient of mine, Josephine. She had gastritis for 15 years. So that's inflammation of the stomach and potentially the esophagus. And she had pain, indigestion and abdominal discomfort. She had all the medical tests, no cause that could be concerned. She had just finished a course of acid blocking medications from the GP, and what we did was we reduced the irritants coming into her diet, so things like sugar and wheat and coffee. We moved to an antioxidant rich diet with lots of fibre from vegetables. We increased foods that feed good gut bugs, and she ate bone broths at least 3 times a week. 12 weeks later, she said her digestion was almost normal, and 6 months later she felt she was symptom free. So I almost love when people come in with something like gastritis or a bowel disease. I think, well, it's really unusual not to be able to make very significant progress in that. And she comes back once a year for a sort of MOT, which is what most people like to do. So other foods that are really great, I like to often get people onto fermented foods. And basically a fermented food is pre-digested before you eat it, because the bacteria have done a lot of the work. So there's very little digestion to do, and these foods are rich in beneficial bacteria. Now, if you have a healthy digestive system, your stomach acids and your bile acids are going to kill most of the bacteria, but even dead beneficial bacteria still have a powerful metabolic effect in your body. And there have been studies that show that heat-killed bacteria actually sometimes have a more potent effect on helping heal things like inflammatory bowel disease. Isn't that mad that dead bacteria can be even better sometimes for you? So there are hundreds of thousands of papers now on how we need beneficial bacteria. So the good bugs help us complete digestion. They convert dietary fibre into fats, butyric acid, etc., to heal your gut every day. And there's many, many studies showing that if you lose your bacterial diversity, then that's linked to autoimmune conditions, inflammation, autoimmune disorders and digestive disorders, and mental health issues as well, and even things that are sort of subclinical, so things like anxiety or being a worrier. It may not actually be your personality type. It may be that you just have a deficit of good bacteria in your gut. And fermented foods used to be in our diets, even in Ireland, in the days before refrigeration. In the 1970s, I remember going to the Aran Islands, and they didn't have any fridges, and they had just got their first flushing toilet on the island, and we were all brought in to see the toilet flushing. We weren't allowed to use it; we had to use the shed with the. But we all got to see the flushing toilet. But they'd no fridges, and I remember the butter tasted so fermented, and in fact everything tasted very fermented. So we used to actually eat quite a lot of fermented foods without realising it. And of course we ate ferments, pickles, things like that. So if we have a modern diet, typical Irish diet, we're going to have carb excess, sugar excess, lots of toxic fats that have been heat treated, and a low intake of beneficial fats. And that is going to reduce the diversity of bacteria in our guts. And some medications, so things like antibiotics, steroids, HRT, oral contraception, acid blocking drugs, they all interfere, they reduce the diversity of bacteria in our gut. So fermented foods, well, everyone knows yogurt is a fermented food, and that has one or two beneficial bacteria in it. It usually has lactobacillus, a couple of different types are possible. But the commercial products are usually not fully fermented, so that they taste sweeter, and then they will often add milk powder into the product after the fermentation is stopped. So they're not always amazing. I love kefir, and I can see a lot of people nodding their heads, so there are lots of kefir users here. Kefir has over 30 different types of beneficial bacteria, and it's tolerated by people who are lactose intolerant, and that is because the critters have eaten the lactose and converted it into lactic acid. And it's also tolerated by a lot of people who are dairy sensitive, or sensitive to dairy proteins, because the bugs have also eaten the casein. They have broken it apart, they've hydrolyzed it, basically pre-digested it. So I would be a dairy sensitive person. I can eat dairy kefir, homemade dairy kefir, no problem. But eating milk, cheese, things like that are problematic. Sauerkraut and kimchi, they're also quite good. Do the fermented foods cause good bacteria to grow in your gut? No. Most of the bacteria die. They exert an effect while they pass through and out the other end, which is great. But they don't cause bacteria to grow in your gut. And in order to bring in new bacteria to grow in your gut, you either need to be taking spore-based probiotics, or what is even better is if you're eating raw organic foods, you will be getting spores of beneficial bacteria coming into your body. And those spores are very resistant to stomach acid and bile acids. And so they survive as far as the site of action, so in your large bowel. And then if you're eating the right diet with lots of fibre in it, they will start to colonize and grow. So another reason why organic foods, especially organic raw foods, are so useful for us. So probiotic foods and some probiotic supplements can have an effect while they pass through, but unless you're getting spores of bacteria, you're not going to be getting new species coming and growing. So yeah, organic is really great for that. Yeah.
It has to be raw, does it?
Yeah, because if you cook it, then you will have killed the spores. They would be heat resistant up to a certain point. And actually, just to digress a tiny bit, there was a bacteria found in the body of a bee preserved in amber, and it was over 1 million years old. And they cut it apart, they isolated the bacterial spore, and they grew it in a petri dish. It grew over 1 million years old. So these things are very, very resistant. So I thought that was just wow. I added in this slide because I thought I really needed to tell you, because this is something really, really simple that we can all be doing. Time-restricted feeding changes your microbiome. So what does that mean in English? It means that if you eat during a limited time period during the day, that you will change the population of critters that live in you to make you healthier, to make you fitter, to make you younger looking, to make you not get as decrepit. as you might otherwise get. So our gut microorganisms actually fluctuate over the course of 24 hours. So they have a rhythm, just like our bodies have a rhythm, just like the ocean has a rhythm. And a disruption of this cycle in the gut bacteria, it impacts negatively on our health, not just on our digestion. So certain good bacteria, there's a particular one I'm thinking of called Akkermansia muciniphila. The clue's in the name. This is a bacteria that actually lives on the mucus in our gut. And what it does is comes along and it trims the mucus. It just keeps it under control. We need the mucus, but we need it not to build up too much. And this bacteria, which we absolutely need, it only grows in your intestine when your intestine is fasting. So that means minimum 12 hours overnight, but ideally more. And ideally, we shouldn't be eating all day. We should try and have at least 4 to 5 hours between one meal and the next. So there's increased research on this time-restricted feeding, and it shows that if you eat within an 8-hour window, it restores the cycle of your gut bacteria. So this reduces inflammation. Inflammation drives every chronic disease. It slows the aging process. It accelerates healing, and it improves body composition. So what that means is if you're too thin, it'll help you gain weight. If you're too fat, it'll help you lose weight. So you'll be better body composition and fitter. And this eating within an 8-hour window can also improve your circadian rhythm. So that means it improves sleep, could help you sleep at night. I've started doing it that the first meal of the day is lunch generally. Sometimes I have breakfast, but usually the first meal is lunch. So I'm eating within an 8, sometimes 9-hour, but usually 8-hour window. So lunch and dinner are the meals of the day for me. Breakfast is gone. When I trained, we were taught to eat little and often, always have breakfast, have protein every meal. The whole thing about eating little and often, some people need to do it, people that have ME, chronic fatigue syndrome, or certain conditions, but for most people it really is a no-no. And if you can feel perfectly well without eating breakfast, it's a fantastic, simple thing to do, and you'll spend a bit less on groceries or put the money into buying more organic. So this improves all metabolic markers of health.
Can I just ask you there? So the first meal would be lunch?
Yeah, it could be. I mean, the science says that it's best of all if you have breakfast and lunch and you stop eating after 3 o'clock. But I'm thinking, I love dinner. I really enjoy eating with my husband, having a dinner. And it's the end of the day, so it's more relaxing than, quick breakfast.
So it would be just two meals?
2 meals a day, but you're eating within a time-restricted window of ideally 8 hours. So you're fasting for 16 hours. So during that fasting period, you can have water, herb teas, but no milk, so nothing with calories in it.
Would that include juices?
No, because juices would contain calories. Yeah. A dash of lemon juice in hot water, that has negligible calories, but yeah, juices. And juices if people often have fruit juices because they think, they're really, really healthy. But remember that eating the fruit is going to give you fibre and things that grow good bacteria, whereas drinking the juice, you're going to drink more juice than you would ever have eaten the fruit. And it gives you a big surge of sugars, which is pro-inflammatory. So vegetable juices are even better, especially the green juices. The root vegetable juices will be very, very high in sugars. Recently, investigators from the Salk Institute for Biological Sciences reported that a brain-gut pathway activated in the brain during fasting acts to promote energy balance by enhancing gut epithelial integrity. What that means in actual English is that the time-restricted feeding basically helps heal the gut. Fasting helps heal your gut, and there's a lot of evidence around autoimmune conditions. Researchers have always found that if people have autoimmune conditions, that if they fast, that the symptoms improve a lot, and they were always wondering what was the mechanism. So it reduces inflammation and helps the gut heal. All autoimmune conditions have a gut component. You must work on the health of the gut in order to get into remission. And autoimmune diseases, I always tell my autoimmune patients, an autoimmune disease is not curable, but our goal here is to get into remission. You're symptom free, you're living a normal life, you're enjoying life, you're not degenerating, and that is the name of the game, to get into remission so that you have no symptoms and you're not needing to be necessarily heavily medicated. Now for something completely different, and we are near the end. How am I doing for time there? Am I okay? A few more minutes, great. Okay, I want to talk to you about the vagus nerve. Has anyone heard of the vagus nerve? Yeah. Did I hear somebody studying nutrition? I couldn't help. Oh, are you studying naturopathy? Yeah. Okay, fantastic. So you know a bit about the vagus nerve. So this is a huge nerve in your body, and it's named after the Latin vagus nervus, literally wandering nerve. So this nerve, it's huge, and if you look on Google for a diagram of the nerve, it's this beautiful, huge network. So it's connecting the brain to all parts of your trunk, basically, and particularly to the digestive system. But this nerve is responsible for your heart rate, for breathing, swallowing, and taste, and a lot more than that. And it controls digestion as well. So the production and secretion of digestive juices, so acid in your stomach, gallbladder juices, pancreatic enzymes coming through the gallbladder. It controls the opening and closing of the valves in your whole digestive system, controlling how fast moves down. It controls peristalsis, which is the wave-like muscular motion that propels the food downwards in your digestive system, and that helps you pass a bowel movement as well. And stress, anxiety, and even resentment and grievances can actually stop its functioning. So can traumatic head injury. So if somebody has even a whiplash or a fall that they think it's no big deal, that can actually impair the vagus nerve from working. And on my YouTube channel, I have a breathing exercise which helps to stimulate your vagus nerve. And every single patient I have showed this exercise to, they all go, oh my God, I can really feel the difference when I do that. I can feel my stress and anxiety levels go down. And I had one patient who had IBS, and she said, when I shout at the children, I can just feel the pain starting up in my bowel. And when she stops and does the breathing exercise, she said the pain just dials down almost immediately. So within a couple of minutes. So meditation, mindfulness, and breathing exercises actually stimulate this vagus nerve, which you remember controls every aspect of your digestion. Some people lose the connection between the brain and the digestive system, so they have an impaired signaling system from the brain to the vagus nerve. And I mentioned head and neck injuries, but also emotional trauma, infections, and certain medications can basically impair this connection, but it can usually be restored. So there's a little test that you can do. If anyone has a pen and paper, this is a test to see, is your brain able to communicate properly with your vagus nerve? So if you have any sort of digestive issue or any sort of autoimmune issue, it's a really good idea to do this test. And it's called the gag reflex test. So if you Google gag reflex test YouTube, there is a 15-second video, and it shows you how to check your gag reflex. I love to do this test on all my new patients to check, is the actual signal able to get through at all? And if you fail the gag reflex test, don't worry, because I have a program of rehab that actually causes noticeable improvement in 8 to 10 weeks in most patients. So, the exception to that might be if there's some major nerve damage from a serious injury that somebody might have had. But generally, people respond really well to these exercises, and it often has been the missing link in helping people with digestive disorders get better if the practitioner doesn't actually know about the vagus nerve, the gag reflex test. And it's very like the old-fashioned test the doctor used to do with you, where open your mouth and say, ah. You're like, why does he want to know that? So that's a really valuable little test to do. Gag, G-A-G, yeah, as in gag yourself, yeah. So that's pretty much it. A bit of a whistle-stop tour. I hope it wasn't too bamboozling. I have a few points just before I wrap up. There's lots more information on specific digestive issues on my website, annacollins.ie. And don't forget that there are also lots of recipes on the blog on that website, and practically every recipe on there uses herbs and spices, and you can look at search things in the search box, is there a recipe using butter beans or whatever, get whatever you like. There are a couple of hundred recipes up there, and as I say, there's nothing terribly complicated. One of my favourite latest ones is turmeric lattes. So if you want to get turmeric into your diet, you can make an almond milk latte or a coconut milk latte, and I have a blend which is turmeric and cardamom and some black pepper to help the absorption of the curcumin in the turmeric, and there are a couple of other things in there, and you can use a non-toxic sweetener like stevia drops, or I saw erythritol on sale out there, and it's absolutely delicious. You think, oh, it sounds like it could be really horrible, but I love it. Absolutely love it. So it might be to your taste, and if you want to heal your digestion or just get more spices in, it's great. Is there anyone here that would like my handout on homemade foods to heal your gut? Okay, I'm going to pass around this, and you can write your name and email on it, and I'll email it out at some point in the week, probably Wednesday, because I'm intending to take Tuesday off. So it might be a few days before you get it. And generally, I also offer free 15-minute phone consultation if anyone wants to avail of that. So you can just talk to me after, or you can just look at my website and get my phone numbers and ring me to book. So that is the end of the tour through the digestive system. If anyone has any questions, now is your moment. Okay, great.
If you're using spices, are you going to damage the nutritional value by heating them slightly?
Well, what I would say is it's a question of whether you can get them in to your body or not. So, for example, if you want to make a curry, well, what I often do is sort of add the spices during the cooking. Sorry, the question was, does heating damage spices? To a certain extent, heating damages everything. But when you, for example, cook meat, or if you're softening onions to make a curry, for example, when you add spices during that cooking process, you are actually protecting the food from generating toxic substances. There was a really interesting study done on burgers. They made a homemade patty, and one of the patties just had salt in it, and the other patty burger had a collection of herbs and spices. It had about 5 or 6 different herbs and spices mixed into it, and they cooked both, and they got volunteers who had, I think they were diabetic, they had blood sugar issues. They got volunteers to eat the burgers, and they found that the markers of inflammation in the bodies of the people who ate the spicy herby burgers were much lower than the markers of inflammation in the bodies of the people who had the plain burger. So it was a grilled burger, but the herbs and spices protected the meat from becoming toxic. So I would say anywhere you can get in the herbs and spices is really, really valuable. If I ever saute anything on a pan, so for example, if I cook a steak on a pan, I always put some thyme or fresh chopped up rosemary on it, coated in it before actually cooking it. You're protecting the meat, and then you can always add more herbs and spices after, at the end. So in Indian cooking, they would often add garam masala at the end, which is a blend of about 8 spices. And so you might cook with the spices and then you add extra at the end. So I think that's quite a good sort of happy medium.
Is it better to use fresh herbs or dried herbs?
Is it better to use fresh or dried herbs? A lot of the studies on herbs are done using dried herbs, and they still get an effect. Fresh is going to be more potent, especially if it's organic, because the organic herbs will have had to cope with more challenges from the environment and from insects, and so the organic ones develop more of the protective polyphenols. So fresh is great, but really, again, going back to getting it in anywhere you can is absolutely great. And with herbs, organic is great. Herbs tend not to be as heavily treated as certain other plants because their volatile oils are act as pesticides. So they tend to be less treated than other plant foods. There's another question there, Donal.
You mentioned spore-based probiotic.
Yes.
Is that related to mushrooms or not?
No, it's not. It is, so it's a supplement of beneficial bacteria, but in a spore form. So the spore form just means that the bacteria is encysted. It's got an extra thick coating, and it is very resistant to strong acids and strong alkalis, and to a certain extent protected from heat. There's a brand, well, the only brand I know of spore-based probiotics are a brand called Probiogen. And they will often, by taking those probiotics and eating the right foods to help them grow, you will often be able to increase the diversity and the numbers of other bacteria that are not in the supplement, because these things work in concert with each other. Probiogen it's a fantastic brand. The only other spore-based probiotic I know is Bacillus subtilis, but it's used in agriculture. It's not actually, I don't think it's available as a supplement.
What does the word spore mean in the context?
A spore, it basically just means a bacteria that has insisted itself to be protected from challenge until such time as the environment becomes friendly, in which case it will start blooming and growing. Hi, there's another question there.
Yeah, I just want to add, I've read that if you're on a blood thinner, say aspirin, that turmeric is not good to take.
Yes, so I mentioned that if you're on any medication, it's always a good idea to check. So many herbs and spices will have blood thinning effects. So will things like garlic have blood thinning effects. But was it aspirin you said?
Aspirin,
Yeah, I wouldn't see that as being a big problem. It would be more problematic if you were on something like warfarin or heparin, which would have a much greater effect. Aspirin would have a fairly mild thinning effect. So I wouldn't be concerned about herbs and spices at all. I would just go ahead. Ray?
And I take a teaspoon of turmeric and ground ginger every night in hot water.
Fantastic, yeah.
With black pepper, but
Great.
how much black pepper should I be putting into the concoction?
I would say just a pinch
Okay.
would be fine, yeah. And that will increase the uptake of curcumin. I think it's about 1,000-fold.
Because you've got to use black pepper to increase the efficacy of the turmeric.
Well, it basically makes the curcumin be taken up much larger amounts.
Okay.
And would that apply in your general cooking as well then?
Would that apply in general cooking? Yes, anywhere where I'd use turmeric, I would always use a bit of black pepper as well. Yeah, it's fantastic. Thank you for that intelligent question. So I think
I bought a turmeric latte
yes.
made by Puka, I think.
Oh, yes.
Would that be valuable?
Well, I did have a look at that product and there were lots of lovely things in it. However, I did notice there was also sugar in it. And I don't like to add sugar to things, so that's why I have my own blend, which is on the blog, actually, the recipe's on there. And I've never seen a commercial blend that doesn't include sugar. Okay, well, thank you. Oh, there's one last question. Yes.
Then you have to take antibiotics. Then afterwards, how is the best to get your
diversity back? So the question is, when you take antibiotics, what do you do to get your good bugs back? Well, one of the things that I always suggest to people during antibiotics is that they take a supplement called Saccharomyces boulardii. It's a beneficial yeast which stops you getting an overgrowth of candida while you take the antibiotic. Because antibiotics kill bacteria, but they have no effect on this yeast-like fungus called candida, and it tends to explode in your gut when you take antibiotics. So I would really be looking at eating organic raw foods, maybe taking a spore-based probiotic, making sure that you've a huge variety of plant foods in your diet to feed the good bacteria. But really it's a sort of a multi-pronged approach. And then maybe having something like kefir, so you're getting a constant throughput of good bugs. They won't take hold, but they will have beneficial effects while they pass through. So I can see the next people waiting to do the demo. So, Saccharomyces boulardii. And so SACCHAROMYCES, Saccharomyces boulardii, BULARDII. And you can get that in any decent health shop, and you take it, alongside the antibiotics, and then for a time afterwards. But it's absolutely fantastic.
What about acidophilus? I heard that was.
Acidophilus. So you could take it at a different time of day from your antibiotic. So the question was, is acidophilus any good? You could take it at a different time of day from your antibiotic. It has an effect while it passes through, but the antibiotic does have a killing effect on it. So it's about getting the diversity back. And you don't want to be necessarily taking something that's just being destroyed immediately. So I would say if you want to keep it cheap and simple, make yourself homemade kefir. And have that all the time as well, that you're on the antibiotics. So thank you everybody for listening. You've been a fabulous audience. Thank you.